Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go! Hello everybody, it's George the Antique Nomad and welcome to this month's Level 2 bonus video. This is where we take 20 items that we've been putting aside all month, and this is the September 2022 edition. We put these items on eBay, we list them and sell them at auction. And the reason for that is it's a little bit of an experiment. It's a moment in time to take a picture of the market and see how these things do in the market at any given point in time. It's also a way to experiment with different ways of selling on eBay, because even within the auction format, there's the option of a set price and let people bid. There's the option of letting them buy it now or bid. There's the option of having a reserve so everybody can bid, but you don't sell unless it makes the reserve price. And in this auction flight, we are doing a little bit of all of those things, and we'll talk about why as we go through. It's very nice to have you with me. I am very thankful to my Level 2 and Level 3 members who are the ones who sponsor this additional content. They make it possible through their memberships and their donation that way, and I'm really grateful for that because then I get to share this information with everybody. But if you want to have early access to this, you do have to be a Level 2 or Level 3 member, and if you're not, and you're seeing this after it released, well, you can take a look in the links in the description and click memberships and go and find out more about our various membership packages. I am really excited with this month's offerings. We have everything from a fairly contemporary but discontinued studio glass piece all the way back to items from the 19th century. So it's a big mix of things. I like to try lots of different items and give you a little bit more deep dive into what goes into them and why they exist and why people collect them and why I think they're good candidates to sell on auction on eBay. So let's start with our very first one here. And this one is something I have always really liked. I liked this piece of glass the first time I saw one, and the first one I saw was in Viking Glass's Blue Neat color, because this is a Viking Glass patio light. At one time, and I think you can see a little residue here, it would have had the Viking Glass sticker on it, but that is now gone. This one was done in satin and it was done in pink, and that is very unusual for a couple of different reasons. Now, this is part of the Epic line. The Epic line came out in 1956. Viking had renamed itself from the New Martinsville Glass Company because they wanted to show people that they were going towards a more Scandinavian modern design. They had done a lot of elegant depression glass and a lot of etched patterns and clear glass. And in the 1950s, they really went for color, and they went for a whole bunch of molded wares that had the look of Scandinavian with all this modern flair to it. And the patio light was one of their best early examples. This would hold a candle in it. These often are in crackle glass. They're generally in the 7 main colors they made. For most of Viking Epic's production, it only came in 7 colors, but in the late 70s, Viking was trying to keep things going, and they realized that a lot of those hot 1960s and 70s colors were going out of style. And what they saw was that pinks and pastels were coming into style. This is around 1980, and so they, for a very brief period of time, the last 4 or 5 years of their production, they made various pinks and lavenders. They made satin glass in order to make it more of a pastel tone. And so this was a real departure for them, this particular shade. And it makes it rather scarce. You do not see this color, and you do not see it in satin glass very often at all. And so those are the reasons I think that this one could really do well online. These are more popular now than ever anyway, thanks to the, I will have to clean that off, won't I? Whoever took off the factory sticker didn't do a good job getting it all the way off. But in any event, the interest in these has really grown a lot because of the interest in fairy lamps and candle vases of various sorts. So I think this should do rather well. I am going to start it at $29, which is what the low end of what they sell for now for the typical colors that you see. I expect it will probably sell as much as double that. A lot of them are now, particularly if they're unusual colors. They also did this in uranium glass, or Vaseline green as they called it, and that is a very hard color to find, and those can sell for as much as $100 or more. Let's look at the next piece here. It is from 1944, which was the year that the New Martinsville Glass Company reorganized and the beginning of its conversion to Viking glass. 1944 was also a pretty significant year for these kids, the Dion quints, because 1944 was about the time that the family was reunited and got to live in a big mansion. The Dion quints and their family had a very fascinating story and a rather sad story. They were the first successful live birth of 5 babies to one mother at one time. They were born prematurely in 1934, and they were born in Canada to a French-Canadian couple who lived in a very small village, were farmers, and already had 5 children. They were in their early 20s. They already had 5 children. And the wife thought she had become pregnant with twins. And when the doctor came to deliver, no, there were 5, not 2. The family was very poor. And for the first 6 to 8 months of the girl's life, well, first of all, they were born prematurely. So the family really couldn't take care of them properly. And they were very short on supplies. People were sending them donations. Other mothers were actually sending breast milk to the quints. It was a real production. And so the family ended up asking the Red Cross for help. And the Red Cross agreed to take them, build a small nursery for them, and help take care of them. Well, the father did it because he was pretty desperate for how he was going to take care of these kids. The mother never actually agreed to that agreement. Part of the reason they agreed to send them to the Red Cross was the other option that they were being pressured to do was to send them to the Chicago World's Fair to be a curiosity. Once the Ontario government heard about that, they decided under the auspices that, oh, the babies must be kept safe, to pass the Dion Quintuplet Guardianship Act. And essentially, the Ontario government seized them from the Red Cross and the parents and made them wards of the state. And the reason stated was to prevent them from being exploited. At that point, the Ontario government then built near where the family lived, so the parents at least could have some visitation of their own children. They built Quintland, and they basically built an amusement park or a tourist attraction based around the quintuplets. To help them not be exploited, the Ontario government proceeded to exploit them. The money that they earned from this was all supposed to go into a trust fund, but somehow got siphoned off into various other uses for travel and photography. And so when these 5 poor little girls grew up and said, well, thank you, we'll take our trust fund now. Well, gee, it was supposed to be $4 million, and it was practically nothing. So they had to sue the government. It was a very, very long and arduous upbringing. But in the public eye, they were extremely popular. They were the biggest tourist attraction in Canada by far, surpassing Niagara Falls. A lot of people who were children in that time know them very well. My aunt, who was born 2 years after they were, went to kindergarten and declared that she was a quintuplet. And all the other kids in school were quite enamored of her until the teacher pointed out where were the other 4. There are still a lot of collectors, and the phenomena that they were still exists in these really sweet pieces like this calendar here. I'm starting this at $10.99. It's in great shape. It's got a few little bumps on one edge. It's obviously never been used. I suspect the value is closer to $20, and we will see who's out there. I have had pretty good luck selling anything that I've had over the years that was quintuplets related, so we're going to give this a try too. Now, there is a whole lot of this next piece, so I'm going to show you from the top down as I hold it into the frame. This is quite large, and it is carved of wood, and this is known, I'm going to get it where I can pull back here. This is known as the Tequila Sunrise cookie mold. These were made in Holland. Actually, they were made throughout Europe, and really the idea of molds for cookies and cakes goes all the way back to the Greeks. They came up with the idea first. It was also done in pagan Germany as part of winter solstice, and the little cakes and cookies would actually tell stories, and that was the purpose of the figures. Of course, you have to remember this is at a time when most people were illiterate, and so pictographs were how you told stories, and so it was done in cookie form as well as other ways. This particular piece is a very heavy wooden piece. They've put ends on it, and they've used big old heavy nails to do that, sometime probably in the 20th century. But this piece should date back right around the turn of the last century. It's rather large, it's well crafted, and the cookie molds like this in wood were really just about gone by the beginning of the last century because they were starting to be replaced with tin molds. Tin was easier to cook in. You didn't have to worry about burning it, and it was easier to get the things out of when you were done, and so it made more sense. But that meant that this wonderful art that had existed for a few hundred years started to be lost. There were actually guilds in the 1700s for people who did these sort of wood carvings, and you had to be a master carver. You can tell the age on these. The ones in that period have incredible detail. They're very, very well done. This one actually has pretty good detail too, even though it's near the end of the production of such things. And you can see the folk costume there. I just think it's a really neat piece, and it is on the large size. I mean, this is about 30 inches tall by 10 inches wide. So it could be a really fun thing to hang in a kitchen or to use as some sort of a display elsewhere. I don't think it's necessarily something that other people who are not in the know would say, oh, that belongs in the kitchen necessarily. I think you could use it anywhere you want it as a wall plaque. This is what they call intaglio, which is where you cut below the surface to make a negative, and then you would pour, in this case, whatever gingerbread or other cake you had, and the positive is the image that you get when you take the cake out, because it's going to be the shape of this guy with the impressions for the eyes and the nose and all that stuff, so you get the detail. They were very popular to use for making cakes for weddings, to give as gifts, and again for storytelling, and they're just really delightful. I am more and more attracted to things that are handmade like this because you know that there's a certain amount of the detail that's one of a kind. It wasn't done by a machine. Even if there was another attempt to make one very similar to this, it would not be exactly the same. And I find that rather appealing about these items, and so do the collectors. So we're going to put this out at only $39. My sense of the value is that it's probably worth about $65. We will see what the market thinks. I don't really come into these very often. The next item I have to show you is a piece of Empoli glass. Now, Empoli glass has changed over the years. Originally, Empoli glass was only done in this sort of bottle green color. That was the tradition of the area. Empoli is an area on the road between Florence and Pisa, not anywhere near Murano. So when you hear people say, oh, Empoli is Murano glass because it's Italian, that is absolutely wrong. Empoli is a different village. There were several glass makers there as well, and it is far from Murano. It is contemporary with a lot of Murano, though, because in the 1950s and 60s, a lot of the Empoli companies started experimenting with more color. And one group in particular started doing what they called latimo, which is cased glass. And here is the item that I have that will be going up for sale that is in the latimo cased glass, latimo, we would probably say. There is the lid. And when we say cased glass, the underside of the lid gives you a really excellent idea of how the casing works. So you have a white layer that is opaque, that you cannot see through. And then you do your yellow layer on top of that. In this case, it's almost a yellow amber color. But when you do it over the casing, you really see the yellow, and when you see it in the clear on the very finial where there is no casing, it comes off as an amber. So it was a way using a couple of layers of glass to actually give the impression that you might have used multiple different colors of glass. So in one step, they were able to get something that looks like it's three colors where it actually is just a cased color over milk glass. It's a very clever way of doing this, and it gives a very strong color, and that's what I like about these Latimo pieces, as opposed to some of the other Empoli glass where the designs are nice, but the color can be rather weak, in my opinion. So this is anything but that. This would have had these proportions because we're looking at 1960s style, so we're looking at minarets and a lot of shapes that come from Eastern Europe that are being adopted into modernist shapes for glassware, which I think is rather fascinating. This one actually has the Made in Italy stamp on it, the paper label. They're usually washed off. I have never seen one that said Empoli, and I've actually never seen one that said the name of any of the glass makers who made this either. Only about half a dozen of the Empoli makers did this Latimo with the casing. Stevia did it, Fratelli Betty did it, Cristalliera Arno did it. It may be one of theirs. I don't really know, and I don't have catalogs or research available to me to tell you which one this might possibly be. But I do know this, and that is that because they were very inexpensive and thin compared to the Murano pieces, a whole lot of Empoli came to the United States in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s. And that was in part because the Italian economy was not doing well, and so we had a lot of buying power there, and these were not expensive to bring over. And the Empoli in particular, because unlike the Murano, they are very thin. And so because of that, we're going to have to pad this very well. But I actually did buy this from another YouTuber who was kind enough to sell it to me, and I had her pack it very well, and it got here, so I know I can get it to the next owner as well. I think this piece is very pretty. This bright yellow is absolutely of its era, but I'm seeing people starting to like bright yellow as accents again, especially because we're starting to see a lot of gray interiors, and yellow is very complementary with that and really jumps out. So I think it's a pretty piece. I'm starting it at $59, which is really not much more than I paid for it. But I bought it under the notion that this is probably worth somewhere around $100 or possibly a little bit more. We will see what the market thinks of that, but I know I like it a lot. Now, this next item, typically I would wear white gloves to pick something like this up because you do want to be careful about your oils on paper, but because I have just washed and dried my hands, and because these pieces are old book plates that do have some staining from their original issue anyway, I'm going to just go ahead and hold them up. I do not necessarily recommend you do it this way at home. If you're collecting this type of paper ephemera, it really does make sense to wear white cotton gloves. So with that preface, I'm going to go ahead and hold them up with my bare hands. I'm selling these together as a lot of 2, and they are book plates. They show in English an area called Pomeroon, not to be mistaken for Cameroon. And they are showing, both of these book plates show the natives of the area doing things that were part of their culture at the time. This is around the early 1800s. This one is called An Indian Sorcerer Performing His Ceremonies Over the Sick. And you can see that I guess we would call them witch doctors, which is really not a very enlightened way of calling them. I suspect that some of their cures for that time, considering this is around 1800, were just about as good as anything that could be done in the West. And here is a Macquarie Dance in the lower district of Pomeroon. And this is a very strange dance with cudgels where you basically more or less whip the other dancer, literally whip them into a frenzy. These are people who have just only begun to have contact with the West. They're not living the way that we do. So it just seems strange to us. And that was the idea behind showing these book plates, is so that people in England could see what was happening in English colonies and territories and what the lifestyle was like, and get a better idea of a life beyond the life of Merry England. So these 2 will be for sale. Pomeroon went back and forth. The French claimed it, the Dutch claimed it. Finally, in 1796, the English conquered it. It went back and forth, and by the 18-teens, it was firmly considered part of what is British Guiana. And because of that, you start to see these sorts of things being published, again, in English, because this is suddenly of interest to the English. So I think they're rather interesting. They're hand color tinted. You can tell that they're hand tinted because when you turn the backs, you can actually see a little bit of darkening on the paper where they did the hand tinting. And I found that kind of interesting as well. These are only starting at $10 for the pair. I suspect they might go for $25 or so. You can see they were book plates because you can actually see some of the image of the plate across from them that is transferred over onto this after many, many years. Now, this next little piece is just a tiny little itty bitty Christmas card. And when I show it to you, you're going to say, is he nuts? Because this Christmas card looks like a little pottery disc pitcher. What in the world am I doing calling it a Christmas card? Well, we turn it around and it says the Franks. And the Franks were John Frank and his wife Grace and their daughter Janice. And they were the people who ran the Frankoma Pottery in Oklahoma. In 1944, they were in really bad shape. There were so many restrictions on materials and chemicals to be used in ceramic glazes. There were all sorts of things that couldn't be done, and they had very little material to work with and were not able to fill orders and were really in bad shape. But they were also very religious, and they really believed in celebrating Christmas. And they wanted for their employees and the people who were their big accounts to send Christmas cards, but they really didn't have the money to do it. But they had enough material to make little pieces of pottery. So in 1944, they took one of their regular designs, minimized it, and put Merry Christmas, the Franks on it and sent it to those people. And people liked it. And then the war ended and they started getting more orders. They started getting more material. They forgot about it for a year or two. And people started asking, gee, are you ever going to do that again? We thought that was so neat. And it turned into an annual line of Christmas cards. And that is what they called these. However, they still were not widely known when this one was made. And it tells us right on the bottom, it was made for Christmas of 1952. Any of these that you see before about 1956, when they moved to Ada and the clay changes color from this tan base to a brick color, well, those early Christmas cards from the Ada factory are very collectible, including this one. 1952 has not been on the market for a while that I was able to find. The last one of these I saw sell was the 1950, and it went for $95. There is a big collector market for the early Frankoma Christmas cards. Now, we see a lot of the ones from the 60s and 70s, and there are collectors, but they were a lot more widespread. They started making them for the public at some point in the mid-60s. So the ones before that are the ones that are the scarcest. This is one of those. I'm very excited to see what it goes for. I know the collectors who understand Frankoma really prize these, and I suspect we're going to start it at $49. The sorghum brown color was the color they used in 1952 for these. I don't believe these came in any other color in the Christmas card line. And so for someone who wants the 1952, this is it. Those of you who have early access, you can go right to the listing as these things drop. You are actually watching this as these listings go live. So if you have early access to this video and are seeing it right when it came out, well, then these items are dropping on eBay as you watch, and you can go right to the listing. The links are in the description. For those of you who are watching this after the fact, you're welcome to hit those links, and if an item is sold, you'll be able to get an idea of what it went for, and you can follow along with us and see how the market responds to these items that way. If they're still available and the listings have not expired, you will still have a chance to bid on them yourself. So we invite you to do that, and here is the next item that is part of this month's listing. And this is a Green Bay Packers poster. And here is the entire team in 1962. 1962 is a pretty significant year for the Green Bay Packers. It's the second year with Vince Lombardi as the coach where they win the championship. They went on to win also in 65, 6, and 7, including the first two Super Bowls. They were the team of the 60s. They are the only team that has won 3 consecutive championships twice in their history. They had Herb Adderley, who is right here, who was a big star for them. A bunch of other folks who are really, really well noted. A lot of these people are in the Hall of Fame now. This was put out by the Milwaukee Journal, and this was pretty much what you got if you went to the game. Pro football was just starting to come into its own in the 1960s. It really wasn't until the big TV contracts and the Super Bowl that the NFL got the kind of hype that it has enjoyed ever since. And the other thing is that the Green Bay Packers are a very unlikely team to exist because they were one of the very earliest teams, and they were started by the Indian Packing Company, which got a bunch of local players together, and basically these smaller towns, Green Bay, I think, had 30,000 people when the Green Bay Packers started. These smaller towns would get the best players from the local teams, and then they would go play other small and mid-sized cities. And that is how a lot of the NFL started. By the late 20s, the NFL wanted to be big time, and so they got rid of a lot of these small teams. But the Green Bay Packers, not once, not twice, but 3 times in their history, went to the community and said, if you really want us to stay in Green Bay, we need your help. And the community backed them. And because of that, the Green Bay Packers are owned by their fans, essentially. Those are the shareholders, and that is why Green Bay still has a team where all these other little teams have long been gone. And that makes them kind of a sentimental favorite for a lot of people. They've made it in a small market. There couldn't have been a whole lot of these given out when they won this championship, so they're not super common. And I'm expecting to start this about $20 and just let the market tell us where it should go. I've seen completed sales as high as 40 and 45, and I suspect that that's where this may end up because we are in the middle of the season. Even though this is dated 2014, which makes it not even Etsy vintage age, it is discontinued. And I have a personal feeling about studio pieces and production items that once a company is gone, especially if they were doing things that were handmade where they cannot be recreated and easily reproduced, and nobody bought the molds and took them across the street and is continuing to make the same thing, then that makes it legit to me as a collectible item, because this is not something that's going to be done again, because in this case, David Lindsay and his wife Ann, well, they retired at the end of 2019, and so they are not producing these anymore. This one was made in 2014. This is Lindsay Art Glass. It is a spatter vase. I find it very interesting because they have done it in when you feel it does have some texture on the outside. So they've rolled the base glass piece and a whole lot of different minerals form these colors, and they melt it all down into the glass, and it's a several layer treatment of this. So that's why you have so many colors in it. And then the black, this design that is done all over, is actually applied as well, infused into the piece. So it has a lot of texture on the surface, actually, a surprising amount of texture. And I think the colors are really interesting. This sort of beige background with the tan. I remember black and tan being really popular together in the late 70s. And then you would have little accents of blue and red around it. Well, they've managed to create all of that and capture it in one little vase, which I think is pretty fun. This measures about 7 inches tall. It's got the Lindsay Art Glass signature on it that you can see very well there. The Lindsays started off actually working for Macquarie Glass in Benicia, California, and then they went off on their own and started their own studio. At one time, there were 5 art glass studios in Benicia. Now there are none. They were the last. And for that reason, I will continue to be looking for items marked Lindsay Art Glass, and I suggest those folks of you who are out there and like this sort of thing do as well. This particular piece, I suspect, is worth about $165, which is my buy it now price, but my starting bid is only $95. So we're going to see if anyone likes it as much as I do and how much. Now, next we have 2 items made of celluloid. You know that I enjoy putting similar items or items made of similar material in the same video so that we can see how they do. These 2 are not necessarily going to be competing because they're rather different from each other, but they are both principally made of celluloid. And so we'll show you that and talk about what that means. Here is the first one. This is a really darling, and it's a little more of a russet color than is showing through. It's not really that sort of blacky gray color that I'm seeing on my monitor. It's got a little more of a rosy brownness to it. I think you see it a little better at that angle. That's a little more true to the color. It is a really fun piece. This is from the 1930s. Celluloid is this plastic here, and one of the reasons people liked it is look up at the top there, and you'll see it's just got a little bit of faux graining. It kind of washes out in this light, but basically it's trying to look like ivory without being ivory, which thank goodness for the elephants that we started to have substitutions for ivory. And celluloid was definitely a good one. Celluloid was invented in 1855. It is the second known form of plastic, and it's the one that probably lasted the longest in the marketplace because it ended up being the thing that they made film out of. Up until the 1950s, film was all made out of celluloid. Celluloid was really useful for a lot of reasons. Besides the fact that you could do the faux ivory graining, it was lightweight. It was easy to mold into various designs, and so you have this really great bird, the catch here. This is in really immaculate shape. This came out of an estate in New York, and she kept things really, really well, and mostly for show, didn't really use them much. In this case, I don't think this has ever been used. Look at that liner. I mean, it's 80 years old, and yet not a scratch, no stains. It's in really remarkable condition. And it's got a nice drape to it. It's about 9 inches and then an extra 7 inches of drape. So you're about 16 inches from the top to the bottom. A lot of people like to hang these and use them as displays. This one, the fabric is also in great shape. It never caught anything. It never ran. It's got this nice floral lace design to it. So this is one that you could actually take and use gently and keep in this wonderful condition that it's already in. I suspect this could go for as much as, maybe $69 rather than the $39 that we're starting it at, but we're just going to start it there and see what the market says about that. Then the other celluloid piece I have is actually 20 years older, and it is so sweet. And I'm going to show that to you now. This came from the same estate in New York. It is a little celluloid fan with a very long celluloid chain. But there is a feature of this fan that makes it really something different. I'm going to show you the back up close first, because I think this gives you a little better idea of why people would use it as a substitute for ivory. It was easy to pierce, carve. It's easy to mold into different shapes. These link chains were very simple to do with it. This one is 20 years older than the purse. This is going to date back to the 1910s. It's something that you would have expected a Gibson girl to wear or to hang on her belt and have just as an accessory. Maybe it's a hot day at the beach. But what's really great about this one, these are pretty collectible and they sell pretty well anyway. One sold recently that was another New Jersey beach souvenir for $60, but it did not have what mine has, which is this. Look at that mermaid. Isn't that something? You can see her little fins down at the bottom there, and just all the hair, all those tendrils, that design behind. That just makes it something really completely different. And it's so appropriate because it was given as a souvenir at a beach place. I just think this thing is wonderful. And if the right person sees it and finds the mermaid, because mermaids are so hot right now, if they find that interesting, or somebody who collects antique, and this is truly antique, it's 110 years old now. If somebody collects antique fans or antique boudoir accessories, or wants to do this in a mount, there's a lot of different ways people would, it is functional, but I would say that this is more likely to be a display item. And for a collector, I am starting this only $39, and it is not going to be a buy it now. I'm just going to put it out there and let the market take it to where it should be. Because this is one where, again, like I said, the last comparable I saw wasn't quite as nice as this one, didn't have the same features, didn't have this design here. So my feeling is to let the market tell me rather than me guessing. And that's why we're going to put this up at auction and see how it does. Now, I don't just put things I think are unusual and might pop for high prices on eBay when I do these auctions. Sometimes I put things on just because I think they're fun, or it's an opportunity to talk about something that's a little different. It is a TWA Junior Pilot set of wings, and I think you can see it pretty well there. The reason that they did these was, yes, to encourage young people to be interested in flight and also to distract them, especially because a lot of kids on their first flight are kind of nervous. And so they would give these out when you came in. It was absolutely the era of gender role stereotyping. So boys got junior pilot and girls got junior stewardess because we were still calling flight attendants stewardesses at that point, which is kind of a funny thing to think now, but that was the way it was, and nobody gave it much thought back then. This is sometime in the late 1970s, or right around 1980, because by the mid-80s, they make them out of plastic rather than metal, and by the late 80s, the airlines are all struggling because of increased competition after deregulation, and they don't give away stuff anymore. So the wings kind of go away. But the wings herald back from the very important ritual in flight, which is a pilot getting their wings. You literally were issued a pair of flight wings when you had done the training and were qualified. And you see that in the military, and then you see it in corporate flying as well. So they come from that tradition, but they became a very popular thing to collect with kids. TWA had an interesting history. It was one of the 4 big carriers that was formed in 1930, where the government basically said, we're going to have 4 major airlines that get to do the big stuff, and then everyone else can do whatever. And Transwestern Airlines was one of those 4. Well, Howard Hughes got hold of them in the 1930s, and he started expanding their flights to Europe and renamed it Trans World Airways. They were still making money and doing fine, and a corporate raider who owned Continental Airlines decided that he was going to take them over, and they said, no, we don't want you. We're going to cast our lot with this other guy named Carl Icahn, also a corporate raider. And Carl Icahn did what he did to companies. He took all the good assets, he sold them off, he sold his shares, he made $400 million, and he left a shell of a company that quickly went bankrupt. And so TWA is collectible in and of itself. These little items, they don't go for a ton of money. I'm going to put it out at $9.99. I suspect it'll probably sell at that price. If somebody likes it a little more, that might go for a few dollars more, but I just thought it was a fun thing to show. When you get to some of the more obscure airlines, small regional airlines, older logos, these can be pretty valuable. I have sold some of these. I sold a sterling one for over $100. This next piece is something I've always really liked. And again, it's another thing that it's not terribly expensive or terribly valuable or terribly uncommon, but they're really nice. And this one is interesting because it is a little different because of its form. This is a 1930s silhouette, but notice it is actually a dresser tray. It's got handles. It is framed like you would hang it on the wall, but it has handles and it is felted on the back. So it was intended not to hang on the wall, but to sit on your dresser with your perfume bottles and other such things on them. What I like about this one is the milkweed in the background and the floral display. They would actually have to go out and harvest milkweed to do these backings. The fluff from milkweed, obviously, not the seeds. Hopefully the seeds are getting planted again for the butterflies. But they would take the fluff and use it in the backgrounds. Van Briggle did this famously with their lampshades with butterflies in them for their lamps. And a lot of the silhouette makers did as well. And they tend to sell for a little bit more when they have the milkweed backing. And they also tend to sell for a little bit more when they have this color around it. And the fact that it's a tray makes it a little more unusual. Silhouette collecting became a really big thing in the 1930s because a lot of the French paper cut silhouettes from the 1870s and 80s started being collected and put in frames. And a lot of them you'll see in frames very similar to this 1930s very basic utility frame, because that's what collectors had access to when they started framing up those little French pieces. So you will sometime, if you see one where it's not painted on the glass, take a look and see if it might actually have been a hand-cut silhouette. Those can be pretty valuable depending on the scene. This particular one, I'm going to start at only 19. I expect it will sell for about 30 to 35. We'll let the market tell us. But I do think it's a very sweet little piece, and I like that she's a spinner and it has a cat. So the cat makes it a little bit cross-collectible as well. You know, when you're looking for things to resell, it's always nice if you can identify one collector for the item. But if an item is cross-collectible and has multiple possible collectors, that is often the direction that you want to go if you're looking for resale. This one is not a studio piece, but it is a scarce piece nonetheless. It is an old piece that took on new life for Blanco Glass. This piece originally, the blank, the shape, was done by designer in 1983. I believe it was Don Shepard who did this for them. This was called the 8310 shape, and it came in small, medium, and large. This is the small, and the small is still 10.5 inches tall, so it's not that small. But this one, you notice, has the stick-on label that says Made in USA. It does not say .com, and that means this is around the year 2000. Well, of course, we could have guessed that anyway, because on the bottom, it's actually signed Richard Blanco, 2002. A lot of these were signed by the Blanco family. Bill Blanco also did a lot of the signatures in this time. This is about the time that they had the big documentary about Blanco Glass that played on PBS. If you're able to catch that, it's really interesting and well worth watching if you're a glass fan, by the way. My friend Blanco Bill from Seattle is in it. He taught me almost everything I know about Blanco. And one thing he taught me is to look for the Tequila Sunrise. This ombre top is what's unusual. They use this very, very bright yellow, so it's not exactly an amberina shading in the traditional Blanco sense anyway. That's why they called it Tequila Sunrise, because it looks like the cocktail with the separation. But then on top of it, they did this top to give it this green ombre, and that is really unusual. So Tequila Sunrise is what it's called. It was a short limited edition in this particular color and form, and these can sell anywhere from about 85 to 125 depending on the day. So I'm starting it at 79, and we're going to let the market tell us what day this is. But because it's fall colors, because art glass is really popular again, and because people are starting back indoors, which is something to consider when you're trying to figure out how to time your listings. One of the reasons I wanted to wait till the very end of the month on this is that October is a time that weather cools. More people will be sitting in front of their computer. They're starting to think about their house again. This is a good time to be putting things out there. Now, this looks like it might be from the same era as that because of the style and the colors and how clean it is, but it's actually, oh gosh, 30 years older? And that is this little piece. This crazy owl. I just love this guy's face. I like the way his eyes are looking. I'm not sure who's looking at who. I think he's very cute, but he also has a good story. This particular one, the story is more derivative from another story. So we'll talk about what it's derived from first. What this is derived from was the stuff made in Washington State by a company called Whitco, the Western International Trading Company, Whitco. And Whitco, in 1958, took a display at a big decorating show in Los Angeles, and all the LA decorators were knocked out because they were doing burnt wood furniture and room dividers and wall hangings and things that looked Polynesian or would be in a tiki bar. The success of Whitco meant a lot of other companies were like, wow, that kind of came out of nowhere. Gee, that's neat stuff. I work with wood. I could do something like this. And so this outfit started making the little owls in the late 1960s in a tiny, tiny town in the middle of nowhere in northwest Montana. And this is by a company called Green Mountain Manufacturing. And I wanted to show that because you almost never see their label on anything. So this is how we know, number one, it's not a Whitco piece. It also doesn't have any real wood burning. This is more carved wood with the design. The felt eyes, I assume that these were probably thumbtacks they used. I mean, people just used a little bit of greenery there. These were very kitschy. They were very cute. They were sold in Spokane during the 1974 World's Fair, and so people saw them. They were sold briefly through, I believe, J.C. Penney's or one of the big department stores, so people in other parts of the country find them. I got this one in Pennsylvania, so they did travel far and wide, and actually a lot of Whitco furniture ended up in Pennsylvania too. The tiki lifestyle, when it took over, really was popular in a lot of places. I'm not saying that I think he's going to sell for a ton, but I am going to start him at $9.99. The last one I sold, I think, went for about $24, and I would be very happy if this went about the same, but he's in really, really good shape, and I just thought he was cute and connected to a good story, and a chance to give credit to this very small firm that really has never gotten credit for these before because no one has seen one with a label on it. So now we know who they are. This one's really neat and I wanted to show it. This is a push 'em up, the 5-game streamliner. 5 games in one. The important thing with these is, does it still work? These were made in the 1930s. And, oh, I gotta have it back where it will actually shoot the ball out of the thing. Oh, let's try one more time. Oh, let's give it a little more oomph. Oh, come on, I know you can do this. Oh, but it went right back in. Apparently it's hard to do this and win. There we go. 6 tries and I'm out. Well, shoot. Okay, so maybe this isn't my best game, but I do think it's really fun. Push-em-ups are based on pinball, which is based on the old billiards and bagatelle games that were popular in France and in England in the 19th century. And by the 20th century, they had turned into handheld outfits that kids could use at home. That is the original marble. It does work. Those are really important things. This was, oh, and there goes the original marble. Well, I'll pick that up in a minute. But everything is there. That's very important. The graphics are really good. A lot of people like these to hang on walls. But it is definitely in the tradition of pachinko and a whole lot of other games played around the world with marbles and trying to get things in slots. A lot of these originally, like pachinko, were gambling related, but when they were made for children, then they had to be about something else. And so you see them being about baseball or other sports or car racing. I had a plastic one when I was a kid that was about that. So it's something a lot of generations of kids have known and understood. And they do sell. I think this one will probably go somewhere in the $60 to $70 range in all likelihood, but we'll find out together by listing it right now. I had the good fortune of my father buying a 1966 Mustang right when it was time for me to learn how to drive. And so I got to learn how to drive on a 1966 Mustang, which was pretty cool. So when I saw this, I just had to grab it because I remember the little ornaments from the first generation Mustangs, and here one is. We are seeing a whole lot of these that are coming out of a warehouse find in Michigan where they were gold plated and never applied to cars. This one is a real one that was on a car, and it is chrome as they were new, and it does have a little bit of wear. You see a little bit of pitting because this actually was used on a vehicle. It's not new old stock out of the box. It's old stock off of a car, but it's in really good overall condition. You could absolutely use it. I suppose you could re-chrome it if you were really serious about being a purist, but if you're going to do that, you might as well put the new old stock gold ones on. I think this is for somebody who wants to make a paperweight out of it or who had a Mustang and it's just a happy memory to set somewhere as a talisman. And I think it's a really cool piece. I'm starting it at $30. I've seen these sell for really high prices, $120, $150. I've also seen them sell for $40 and $50. It seems to have a little bit to do with who's out there looking for it and why at any given time. I'm curious to find out whether an original is going to sell for more than these new old stock gold-plated ones that seem to be rather common and coming out of a big pile right now. So we will find out by putting this on now and seeing what it does. But the Mustang, boy, what a phenomenon that was. When that car was introduced in the middle of 1964, it was compact, it was sporty, it had a good engine, it was maneuverable, it was affordable. I mean, it was really just so trend-setting. our next item here. And yes, I can actually see the monitor through it. It works very well. This is called a telescope elbow, and you can see that right there. And if you notice, pulling up, it's got a bunch of marks, and it says it's by Herschetta Hall Clock Company, 1943. Hard to imagine, but in the Second World War, the War Powers Act allowed the government to determine what companies were going to make what. And if they needed to make something that was necessary for the war effort, well, that is what they did. They did not make clocks and things during the Second World War. They made elbow telescopes. This would have been used perhaps on a howitzer cannon or some other situation where you needed to be able to see around a corner without revealing yourself. And so this clock company, which started in 1877 in Cincinnati by a fellow named Frank Herschetta, who was a very good clock repairman and struck out on his own, well, he got a gold medal for making clocks in around 1901. He won a bunch of awards at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 and had a very, very successful clock business going when the Second World War came. And they said, well, they would look at your factory and what you made, and based on that, well, you have this sort of technology and this sort of precision, and we're going to assign you this. Honeywell was also assigned these, so you will see them marked Honeywell as well. There's a lot of people who collect World War II related items. I thought this was interesting. Again, I see prices all over the board on these, but my feeling is that this is probably worth somewhere in the $75 to $85 range to a militaria collector. I'm starting it at $49, so we'll see where it lands, somewhere between those numbers or somewhere else. We'll find out together. This next piece is just fun. I'm going to show you this one next, and I'm going to put it on because you know me in hats, and this is a hat. Ooh, there it is. There it is with the brim down. But this is not really a hat that you would take out and wear. Although it was made for people who do wear red hats, because this is a tribute to the Red Hat Ladies. Oh my goodness, now I am going to need a hat. It's a tribute to the Red Hat Ladies. That is a group that started, it's nationwide. The Red Hat Ladies started in 1998. For women over the age of 50. It all started because a woman named Sue Ellen Cooper, who is an artist in California, noticed that her friends who were aging were not going out and having fun and living their lives anymore. And they were spending a lot of time talking about, oh, we're getting old, we're getting old. And she said, you know what? I think people should grow old playfully. And so she started the Red Hat Ladies Society, and it's based on a poem by the poet Jenny Joseph that ended up being published in Reader's Digest, and a whole lot of people were exposed to it about the same time in the 1990s. And it starts, when I am an old woman, I shall wear purple with a red hat which doesn't go and doesn't suit me. And that was the origin of the Red Hat Ladies. Well, right around that time, actually in about 2000, as you can see by the mark in the middle here, this was done, I've got it upside down there. This was done by, there's his monogram, Dave Fetty, the now very well-regarded, very famed Fenton designer. He's known for hanging hearts and a whole lot of other things. And we saw him at the Fenton convention this July. I got to meet him and interview him. That'll be coming out pretty soon, by the way, that interview. He's a very interesting man in person. And he did this for Fenton when they were still going around 2000. You can see it's got controlled bubbles all through the piece. So it was actually a very difficult piece to make. They did it in the ruby red, which was a more expensive color for them. And then the feathers are all applied, and it's just cute as can be. It's also a really hard piece to find. They did not make a lot of these, and it was a very limited edition. And because of that, the price on these when they were new was almost $600. I am not starting it at $600. I am actually starting it at $9.99. And you think, oh my gosh, how can you do that? You might lose your shirt. Well, this is one where if I lose 20 bucks because I am paying to have a reserve on this piece. There is a number that I'm willing to take for this. I can't take less than that. And, you know, the choice was to start this piece at that number, which honestly, a lot of people, they see a big number and they get scared, especially on a piece they've never seen before. It's not like there's comps for this because they're so seldomly sold. There hasn't been one sold in ages. So there isn't a place to just run and go, oh, well, sure, I feel comfortable paying $500 because the last person paid $500. These haven't traded enough to have that kind of background. So you really have to kind of guess where the market should be on this. And using a reserve is a way to let the market tell you where it is without taking the chance that you end up selling the piece for $10 or that you price it so high that nobody bids and then you don't really know where the market is. It's not necessarily good to burn a piece, especially an unusual piece, by putting it out on the market and then not managing to sell it. So we're going to do that and we're going to see how it goes. I think it's a really fun piece. It's a great story. And it's certainly a designer that people are really interested in now. And there's a lot of work to that. Oh, one other thing I should have shown before I set it back. He also did this big applied twist all the way around the brim. And so it's just got a lot of design. I just thought it was a neat piece. And it is fun to bring something different and interesting to you. And that's what I'm going to do again right now, because my next item is sitting right here. This is our penultimate item. And these are just very sweet and a little bit different for Bakelite earrings, which is what we have here. Now you look at them and you say, but wait, what's that yellow flower? That doesn't look like Bakelite. And you are correct in that. These are Bakelite with something made probably of an early nylon or another kind of plastic, because this is a transition era piece. This is right towards the end of World War II. We're just starting to see people wanting to have lucite. The war's almost over. Bakelite's been a really big thing because you couldn't get a lot of other materials. So now people want rhinestone again. So Bakelite producers realize that, oh, we better do something else because this is not going to be the thing anymore. I know that I don't wear them well, but there they are. I just wanted you to see them on because they really are splashy and they've got a big showy look to them. So on the face of someone who doesn't have a goatee, they probably would look great. They are Bakelite. They are carved, and then these flowers are set in the carving. So you see a little bit of shaping there. I just think they're really cool. They have been tested, so we know that they really are Bakelite other than the yellow flowers, but they've got a little more pizzazz than just a pair of Bakelite disc earrings that we see fairly common. So this set I am starting at $19.99, and it's going to be no reserve. A friend of mine has had these. I saw him sell them at a show for $45. He got them again a few years later. He sold them to another dealer because he got them cheaply. She sold them for $45. So that's probably where they go retail, but we're just going to let the market tell us what they think of these. Sometimes when I get a pretty good deal on something, I'm happy to let eBay just tell me how much I'm going to get and figure that I'm satisfied and happy with the results no matter what. And it's an interesting chance to see what the market is and what other people think of these things. And with that, I'm going to put this last item up here. I got this at the Springfield Antique Show. I didn't get to do a lot of shopping until the last day, and I was pleasantly surprised in spite of all the other YouTubers who had been through that show and all the other customers and how busy. It was a record show for me for the Midwest. I sold a ton of stuff. I thought, oh, there's not going to be anything left. I did very well shopping on Sunday morning there. And this was one of the pieces I got. And the reason I bought this, it is restaurant wear. They had a whole bunch of restaurant wear for sale there. It was all sort of sitting in various piles. And this was the only one that had a ship on it. And I thought, you know, when it has a ship or sea life or an interesting border design, I'm going to pick that up and look at it and see what it is. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see on the back that it said it was from the Bowman Miami Biltmore. The Miami Biltmore is in Coral Gables. It was built in 1926, right at the peak of the 1920s Florida land boom. It was one of those big pink Florida hotels. For a couple of years, it was the tallest building in the state of Florida. It was a very big deal to the vacationers who were going down. And a lot of those were people from New York going to Miami, in part because Bowman, who was a Canadian who moved to the United States and started the hotel chain, had done very well and had Biltmores in New York. He had them in Los Angeles. He had them in Havana, Cuba. And when he opened in Coral Gables, a lot of the people who went to those other places, well, they had to go to Coral Gables and see what that was like, because if there was a Biltmore hotel, Coral Gables must be a nice place. And that actually has really stuck. Coral Gables is still considered a very nice place. And so apparently, if you have a big fancy hotel and you can keep it running, which they had a hard time with, it actually closed for a period of time. It was a VA hospital in the Second World War. It was part of the University of Miami for a while. But when it was reopened, it was restored as a hotel and made a National Historic Site, so it should probably remain a hotel from now on. In any event, this was done in 1941, right before the VA took over the hospital, the building, and made it a hospital. And so because of that, this pattern is not really found very often. And the last one I saw sold for $60 online. I am putting this out at a starting price of $45, and we're going to let the market tell us where it is from there. And with that, this has been a lot of fun. I always really enjoy bringing you these different things. It's fun to see how the market responds to them. It's fun to see your comments and what you think of them. So please do leave some and let me know what you thought of all this. And if you are watching this video and these items are still available, you can hit those links in the description below and it will take you right to the item and you'll be able to check it out. So please do. It was great to have you here with us. Thanks so much to my level 2 and 3 members for sponsoring this video. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you again very soon. And at some point after these things sell, we'll have a follow-up and we'll let you know how they did. Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below, click the bell to be notified when new videos upload, leave a comment below, and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.